I will talk today about the elections that have taken place in Indonesia on the 9th of April and what they mean for the consolidation of Indonesia's democracy in general and the evolution of Indonesia's party system in particular. So first of all, I will talk about the results of the parliamentary elections. Second, I will analyze the reasons for the victory of President Yudhoyono's Partai Demokrat, or Democratic Party. Following that, in a third step, I will discuss the possibility of a new Yudhoyono dynasty emerging. Fourth, then, what are the future, if Yudhoyono's party has been so powerful, so successful in this election, what does this mean for the established parties in Indonesia's party system, Golkar, PDIP, and particularly as well the Islamic parties. Fifth, I will talk about an issue that has been controversially discussed within Indonesian studies over the last 2 years or so, the so-called Filipinization of Indonesian politics. Quite a few observers believe that you have now a trend in Indonesian politics that looks very similar to the Philippines, and that is the rise of personalized parties, as well as the rise of celebrities as key political figures. So I will discuss this issue. And of course, sixth, I will look at democratic consolidation in Indonesia as a whole, identifying four key problems. So here are the results of the parliamentary elections of 9th of April. These are preliminary figures. I should say that I get most of my data from the Lembaga Survey Indonesia, which is the most preeminent survey institute in Indonesia. So this was a quick count that was done by LSI, Lembaga Survey Indonesia, done on the night of the elections. There have been 4 such quick counts, exit polls, and the numbers have all been very similar. So this is very likely to be very close to the end result that, as Malcolm has said, will most likely be released on the 9th of May. So you see here the Democratic Party, Partai Demokrat, with 20% of the votes emerging as the winner. That's up from around 7% in 2004, so almost tripling the result that it had 5 years ago. PDIP, a secular nationalist party run by former President Megawati Sukarnoputri, probably second. Other institutions have her party third. But nevertheless dropping from around 18% in 2004 to now 14%. Golkar, the electoral machine of former autocrat Suharto, last election in 2004 got 22% and was the largest party, now down to 14%. PKS, also of course a party that attracts a lot of attention, especially in Australia, for its very Islamic, Puritan Islamic image, now the largest Islamic party in Indonesia with 7%, slightly increasing over its result in 2004, which was, I think, 7.3%. PAN, also a Muslim party, 5%, down from 6%. P3, also an Islamic party, the only Islamic party that was allowed to operate under Suharto, now down from 8% to 5%. PKB, a traditionalist party which is associated with former President Abdurrahman Wahid, down from 10% to 5%. And the last two are new creations, Hanura and Gerindra. Gerindra is the party run by former Kopassus commander Prabowo Subianto, the former son-in-law as well of Suharto. So 4.5% in Hanura, run by former TNI commander Wiranto, with 3.7%. So that's the result. You have another party here, PBB, Bulan Bintang, but there has been a parliamentary threshold applied in Indonesia this year for the first time of 2.5%. So the party that you see here, Bulan Bintang, with 1.7%, would not make the cuts. You have only these 9 parties represented in the next parliament. So what are the reasons for Yudhoyono's victory and the victory of his party? Now, I contend that his victory was primarily due to a very intensive Cash for the Poor program that has been implemented since mid-2008, since June 2008 to be exact. There was a total of around $2 billion distributed in cash, school allowances and microcredits. And again, this was a program suddenly implemented in the middle of last year. Now, of course, if you look at the way these programs were structured, the audience that was targeted, these kinds of policies obviously copy elements of taxonomics. The policies, the approach implemented by former Thai Prime Minister Thaksin in Thailand, but which also have been used in other Asian democracies, most notably in India and partly in the Philippines. Now, these populist economic policies helped Yudhoyono to achieve a really remarkable turnaround in his political fortunes. And the following slide will show you just how remarkable that comeback was. So you see here, look at the blue line, that's Partai Demokrat. If you look at its ratings in July 2008, it had 8.7% of the votes. It was third behind Megawati's party PDRP and Partai Golkar. And that is when the cash program came in. It was started in June, and you see then a meteoric rise from 8.7% to 24% in February, the highest it reached before the elections. So, as far as I can see, a very clear relationship between the cash program and the way Partai Demokrat was viewed by the Indonesian electorate. The same for SPY's, Yudhoyono's popularity ratings. If you look again at June 2008, Yudhoyono was in fact behind Megawati in the polls with 25%, and then look what happened after the cash programs were implemented. Basically an unstoppable rise from 25% to now around 50%. Also numbers again all from Lembaga Survey Indonesia. They asked here in February whether the cash assistance programs have helped Indonesians to lessen the burden on their expenses, on their economic conditions. 59% said yes, after these cash programs were implemented, our burden was lighter. Only 24% said they're still heavy, and 17% said there was no problem even before the cash programs were implemented. So a very clear statement from the Indonesian electorate that the cash programs implemented since June 2008 have helped them with their personal economic conditions. Also very interesting figures here. Again, if you look at June 2008, 58% of Indonesians said that their economic condition was worse than it was a year before, and only 17% said that it was better. Now, this was before the global economic crisis started, and this was when Indonesia recorded very healthy economic growth, 6.4% at the time when this poll was taken. But yet Indonesians were dissatisfied with economic conditions. Then look at the figures in February 2009, again after the cash program. And suddenly, in the midst of an unprecedented global financial crisis, which also has hit Indonesia, where growth rates are down, suddenly 38% of Indonesians say that the economic condition is better than it was a year ago, and only 31% thought otherwise. So again, this is all taken place against the background of generally declining economic conditions in Indonesia, but at the same time, a huge cash program was implemented. But before we go too far into these parallels with Thaksin, let me say a few things that certainly distinguish Yudhoyono from his Thai counterpart. Of course, politically, Yudhoyono is a much more moderate, a much more restrained political character. He's very unlikely to be as combative, even belligerent, as Thaksin has been. And Yudhoyono, whatever happens in his second term, is very unlikely to go down the same path of political divisions and conflicts that Thaksin has chosen for his party in Thailand, with the known consequences. Secondly, Yudhoyono also has a very clean political image, very much unlike, of course, Suharto's family or even Megawati's family. His family has stayed out of business for most of the time. And he has also led a very credible, extensive, and rather effective anti-corruption campaign since coming to office. And it's probably the largest anti-corruption campaign in Indonesian history. Now, what impressed Indonesians particularly was that the father-in-law of Yudhoyono's son was arrested in November 2008, so a member of the immediate family. And that made a big difference for Indonesians who were very cynical about the anti-corruption campaign before, said, okay, you know, it's easy to arrest a few members of parliament as long as they're not from your own party, or arrest a few former ministers who are no longer in your cabinet. But once you go after your own family members, that certainly makes a difference, and it's clearly expressed in the numbers, in the support rates that his government got in terms of combating corruption. So you see here, after the arrest in November, a clear increase from 63 to 77%, and now in February 80% of Indonesians believe that Yudhoyono's anti-corruption campaign is either good or very good. Even clearer, these figures, which party is seen as the least corrupt one. Now, I can tell you that Partai Demokrat is not a candidate for a very clean and good governance-oriented party, but suddenly after the arrest of Yudhoyono's family member in November, look what happened there. In October 2008, only 11% thought that Partai Demokrat was the least corrupt party, but then after the arrest, that jumps to 26%. But let me put a footnote to this. I still believe that although the anti-corruption campaign was an important issue in the campaign, and the numbers clearly show that, it was not as important as the cash program. There have been other polls that I couldn't put up here, but the Daily Compass just a week ago did a poll and asked people, which kind of issues do you think are important for Indonesia at the moment? And around 80% answered unemployment, poverty, the price of basic foodstuff, these kinds of things, social issues. And only 5% said that corruption was an important issue. So this needs to be put into context. Corruption was important, but the cash program that I talked about earlier was certainly, in terms of determining the outcome of the elections, much more significant. So what will this all mean for the future of Yudhoyono, his family, and his party in Indonesian politics? Certainly, if Yudhoyono is still a popular figure when he leaves office after his second term in 2014, it's very likely that he will try to establish some kind of political dynasty, some kind of continuation of his political influence. Of course, if he leaves office with popularity rates like President Bush in the United States, then that is not an option. But just if he is still very popular in 2014, and that is certainly a possibility, then he would certainly look at such a dynastic solution. But even if he does, there are three key problems for him in arranging a succession in his favor. First of all, his party, Partai Demokrat, the Democratic Party, lacks credible senior leaders. All the leaders of the party who are now between 50 and 60 years old are not very popular figures. They are operating from the background, and none of these figures could take over when President Yudhoyono leaves office in 2014. There are quite a few younger leaders who are now being groomed by Yudhoyono, Andi Malarangrang, Anas Urbaningrum, and these kinds of people, but they're all in their late 30s or early 40s and certainly would be too young for key political office in 2014. Second problem, Partai Demokrat is very weak institutionally at the grassroots. If you go to the provinces, at the districts, it's often the governors or the district heads who support the party out of opportunistic reasons because they want to get access to central government funds. But in terms of institutionalization, Partai Demokrat remains one of the weakest parties in Indonesia's party system. Third, especially if you think about the dynastic solution, certainly if you look at what Yudhoyono has done about his sons in the last 2 years, there are clear indications that he wants his sons to step into his place in the longer term. He has appointed his younger son, Edi, to a senior position in Partai Demokrat, and he has just won a parliamentary seat with the help of his father. The oldest son is in the military, Agus Harimurti, and he is seen usually as the more charismatic and more prospective of the two sons. But I looked at his sort of potential career line in the military, so he would only reach senior military office by around 2031 and retire from the military in 2035. So a very, very long period that he looks at in terms of preparing his sons for potential succession. So you have a situation where none of the party leaders are prepared to step in 2014, and the sons are probably 2 decades away from doing so as well. So that leaves probably one solution, and that is his wife, Ani Yudhoyono, who has been very crucial, in fact, in his political career. Some of you may know that Yudhoyono married into Ani's family, which was one of the most distinguished military families in the 1960s and 1970s, and only by that marriage, in fact, he could gain political prominence and gain the connections that he needed to make a quick rise in the military. She has also been a chairperson, a vice chairperson of Partai Demokrat until 2005. She was one of the founders, so she has been very active in the party. So while this now looks very speculative, it certainly is a solution, especially if you look at other models that have been around. Here you see the example of Argentina, where the Kirchners in 2007 basically exchanged places. President Kirchner handing over the presidency to his wife and taking over the government party at the same time. So again, this is probably a scenario that Yudhoyono may look at in the next 5 years, and it will be very interesting to watch how Ani Yudhoyono will position herself in that time. So now to the more established parties, and I can't go into the details here. If you have later questions to particular parties, let me know and I can talk about this in the Q&A. But generally you will have seen a lot of comments, observations after the 9th of April that say that the established parties are the real losers of the elections and that some of them look at a very bleak future in the next 5 years and will probably be extinct in the longer term. Now, if you look at the way these established parties are entrenched in the party system, such a bleak scenario is very unlikely. In fact, in contrast to Partai Demokrat, these parties, PDIP, PKB, Golkar, P3, and others are historically and socially rooted. Some of them trace their development back to the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, while Partai Demokrat is really only a shell that exists because of Yudhoyono's presidency. Now, one of the reasons why I believe that the established parties will do better in the future than the observers predict is that you will see a concentration process in the party system as a result of the parliamentary threshold that was introduced for the first time in this election of 2.5%. This will create a very large hurdle for newcomers, will be a disincentive for people to establish new parties. We will see much less parties competing in 2014 than competed this time. And the established parties will be the major beneficiaries of that. A lot of the splinter parties that were established as spin-offs from the established parties are very likely to return to their former parties in order to profit from presence in Parliament and the like. There's, of course, one footnote to this, that these parties, PDI Perjuangan, PKB and others, they will have to overcome some of the internal difficulties in order to become effective electoral vehicles. Again, if PKB, for instance, which has been mirrored by political conflict for the last 5 years because of former President Wyatt's involvement, if he continues to mess up the party in the way he did in the last 5 years, then of course the outlook for PKB remains bleak. But if there's some development there that would see Wyatt leaving the political stage in one way or another, then certainly the prospects for PKB and all the other parties as well are better than the observers are now prepared to admit.